Good morning, good day, good afternoon, good night, wherever you are, and welcome back to Achampnator Reads. Today I read chapter 22 of The Last Elf. Let's go. Chapter 22. The incomplete book on dragonology had left out quite a number of things. The elf boy's ideas about dragons were limited, sparse, incomplete, and lacking as leaves in winter of apples in times of famine. With great patience, the dragon re-explained everything from the beginning. Through the egg? Yosh asked. Through the thickness of the egg, the dragon confirmed. The young elf's intellect seemed as narrow as the cupboards in which brooms are stored. The dragon was stunned. He seemed to remember some book or other that categorically asserted, now astute and intelligent elves were. Were. If it were not the case, then why, in your view, would a dragon sit on the egg for years on end? To keep it warm, as birds do, suggested Yosh. The comparison made the dragon shiver, like there was cold snow on its back. The scales of its tail straightened. Like birds? How dare he! Urbrow's ancestors would have made the elf pay for such an insult, with blood, indeed with fire. A bit of fire and a bit of rosemary. Fire, salt, and a bit of rosemary. He seemed like a tasty youngster. No, absolutely not. Whatever nonsense he might say and think, you can't roast someone who has pulled you from the egg, taught you to fly, and helped your parent while it was brooding you. The dragon sighed, then started to explain again in a calm and even voice. Really started to explain again in really scraping the barrel of what remained of his patience. Brow explained that of what remained of his patience. Explained birds are just birds, which is to say that they have the brains of a chicken. A bird sits on an egg, because being a bird and hence incurably idiotic. It has no other way of keeping it warm. If it was a dragon, on the other hand, it would calculate the temperature required for the time required and obtain it by means of combustion, refraction, exploitation of seismic steam, or some other means. Dragons choose to sit on their eggs rather than going around exploring the universe and improving the world with a presence, because during the process of brooding, thought was transferred directly from the parent dragon to the child dragon. In fact, the dragon's reproductive system was truly marvelous. Halfway between that of the phoenix and that of elves, humans, dogs, cats, canaries, dolphins, penguins, and sharks. Yes, certainly, of course. And butterflies. It might be an improvement if Yosh could keep from constantly interrupting. The dragon hated being interrupted. A loathsome thing. Loathsome! Had Erbrow already mentioned the fact that dragons are magnificent? Nature's masterpiece? The very essence of creation? He didn't want to forget it. Continuously being cut off mid-fly by frequent and pointless interruptions. Who had taught the dragon to speak? His father? His father, obviously. Who else? Father, the Magnificent, if Erbra were to call him by his correct title, had taught him from memory. The memory of the parent dragon is concentrated to that of the baby, and communicates to him all his own knowledge and memories, so that a newborn barely emerged from the egg and instructed about flight is already well. There's really only one word: perfect. To return to the beginning, the dragon went on. The dragon's reproductive system is halfway between that of the phoenix and that of elves. Have you ever met a phoenix? No? Clearly not. The last ones lived between the third runic dynasty and the Middle Era, and you elves, miserable creatures that you are, do not absorb the knowledge of your forebears through fire. The phoenix regenerated its own being, always as the same individual. Fire was, you see, the philosopher's stone, the route to eternal youth, until someone wrung their necks to put them in a stew. Phoenixes were immortal. Luckily, the stew was good. The rosemary abundant, and we wiped them out. You wiped them out? You wiped out the phoenixes? They were immortal? And you wiped them out? But what was happening to the young elf? Had he forgotten how to speak? Yersh was utterly speechless. It was as though he had just fallen into cold water. He took a step backward. One of his bare feet slipped on a bone, half stripped by an owl, and he fell bottom first into the layer of excrement of various birds that covered the ground. Perhaps intelligence came to elves when they were a little older. Are you feeling quite well? Elbro asked him. You wiped them out, he stammered again. How could you? Well, it wasn't difficult, the dragon remembered with emotion. It was an Elbro's own memory. He had absorbed it from the parental memory, but the dragon's mouth still watered. A few bay leaves and a bit of sea salt. Cook just for a few moments like fish. But they must have been magnificent birds. Precisely. Strawberries are magnificent as well, and we ate them. Phoenixes were the most wretchedly obtuse, smug, dull, and utterly brainless creatures ever created. When someone is born completely witless, his extinction can hardly come as a surprise. The only things that a phoenix has in its head are its tail feathers and the wrinkles under its eyes. You could only have an idea if you'd met one. Talking to a phoenix is an act of desolation, like finding yourself in the middle of a field of dry grass and flowers that have never blossomed. The very memory of such desolation fills my brain. And it was an act of mercy for their existence, was one of pure suffering, predisposed to burn alive so as not to age. No new phoenixes were born. You see, what was reborn was the same chicken, over and over again, with its head full of nonsense. The dragon sighed. For dogs, cats, canaries, chickens, elves, boar, dogs, and now that I come to think of it, butterflies, the system is different. There are a father and a mother, and they unite and have a child, or two, or five. In the case of rabbits, even elves are 15, even 11 or 15. And these children are neither their father nor their mother. They are a new creature. Father's nose, grandma's eyes, mom's big toe, other grandma's back teeth. The child is new, unique, and unrepeatable. And to teach them you have to start from zero. From the elements of written and oral communication to peeing at a potty and pooing far away from home. It's all a matter of upbringing and education. Do you follow? While we are on the subject of excrement, my son, are you aware of what you're sitting in? Surely the elf must have bumped his head as a child against something very hard. This youngster. And to think that someone had written that elves are the most brilliant creatures on the planet. Josh nodded. He was fully aware of what he was sitting in. He struggled to his feet and set off out of the cave. There was a little puddle of water, not far off, where he could wash himself. The dragon followed him. On the one hand, George was relieved, infinitely relieved. On the other hand, he wanted the baby dragon back, squealing in disastrous and looking at him with adoring eyes. Now the dragon didn't squeal and he didn't burn things, but there wasn't much in the way of adoration either. Fog engulfed the world. The horizon was lost in the haze. The water in the puddle was icy but clean. George stripped off his dirty, filthy, stinking rags and then resolutely plunged in. The dragon is not his own father, but a very similar copy of him. He absorbs science, knowledge, and the memory of roasted phoenix through the shell of his egg. Mother Nature never ceases to be amazed at his genius, the dragon concluded in an inspired and emotional tone. Since the dragon is a perfect creature, there would be no sense in altering anything. While your system always leads to different children, with the hope of, sooner or later, a possibility of, the dragon looked benignantly at the elf as he sought his words. Improvement, he finally suggested with a benevolent smile. Clearly, George should have enjoyed the adoration while it had lasted. Now that he came to think about it, it was the fate of his life to notice good things only after he had lost them. The water really was cold. He dreamed of being a fish. The cold became a pleasure. The water slid caressingly about him. Now the dragon was in his stride. The egg is laid, and the brood begins at the end of the dragon's life. Precisely so that the dragon can pull all his knowledge, all his experience, all his memories into the new creature, he added in an inspired voice. While brooding, the dragon uses only a small part of his brain, the occipital part, which is also the most, how should I put it, stupid? Suggested George. He was really starting to have enough. You realize that I could burn you like a thrush, roast you like meat on a spit, make you blaze in the glory of the flame? The dragon asked irritably. You'd never do that. How can you be so certain? Surely you can't read my thoughts, not from this distance at any rate. You wag your tail when you look in my direction, the elf boy shot back. The dragon looked a little hurt. He sat down on his tail, so as to keep it from moving. I find your love for such crude terms contemptible, the dragon announced haughtily. The occipital lobe is the more, and limbic lobes are the seats of courage, of knowledge, of intelligence, of magnificence, and of, how should I put it, unbearable self-importance, Yosh suggested. Pride, corrected the dragon. Pride, superiority, and awareness of one's own superiority. This time, the dragon was really annoyed. I was saying that the parent dragon uses only its inferior brain to think, eat, sleep, and live, because the superior one is constantly in contact with the new dragon's brain to communicate all its knowledge. So that when the dragon is born, it has all its father's memories, and the moment their first flight connects the various parts of the brain, the dragon is ready to be perfect, absolutely perfect. Excuse me, but when I speak of our perfection, how it moves me. A tear of emotion fell down the dragon's cheek, having reached the edge of his lip. The tear detached itself, gave a little jump into the void, and fell with a plop on the water, where it made a series of concentric circles. Now that he was clean, Yosh came out of the water. The icy wind swept over his soaked skin. He shivered. He sneezed. The dragon's eyes, lost in the celebration of his own magnificence, looked down and came to rest upon him. You're shivering like an autumn leaf. and an icy wind, he observed. That means you're cold, he concluded, smug and triumphant in his own wisdom. I knew I wouldn't be able to hide it from you, Yosh agreed. He hated the dragon's superior tone. I can only imagine and perceive by intuition. You know, we dragons don't know what cold is. The beast went on, still smug and pompous. Scales are excellent. Thermal isolators, not to mention their two interscapular leather-clad wings. I'm breathless with admiration, replied the elf, who was growing colder and colder, frozen in fact. He had to get out of the open air and try to warm himself somehow in that cold cave covered with bird excrement. Perhaps he could create some warmth by burning the excrement, but it wasn't the most pleasing prospect. If only he could stop his teeth from chattering. The dragon looked at him for a long time, then stretched his wings, and the two enormous inner pockets opened up, warm and very soft, like a double marsupial pouch. Climb up, he suggested. Let's go flying. Flying? For a few moments George was confused. He was so irritated that he had even forgotten how lovely flying was. Lovely? Magnificent? Flying, confirmed the dragon. He stretched his wings a little more. You're warm here, he reminded him. Flying, George agreed, jumping into the middle of the soft, warm leather. Toward the mountains this time. The dragon had transformed abruptly from an unbearable little brother into an unbearable big brother, but all in all, flying made up for the fact that he was no longer a baby. As George climbed onto the dragon's splendid back, his mind raced with questions for the dragon. Now I wanted to ask you. Dogs, cats, canaries, chickens, and elves reproduce like butterflies, you said. Does that mean I came from an egg as well? Really? Did my mother or my grandma brood it in your view? Grandma, of course, since I lost my mother immediately. Will my wife brood our egg? I'll brood like dragons and our child, or will I be able to do that too? Do elves brood like dragons and chickens, or do they leave the egg somewhere to brood itself as butterflies do? And spiders. I once saw a spider laying. The dragon gasped. Sorry, my son, but have none of the people you've met, none of the books you've read explained the facts of life to you? George realized that one of the things he hated most in the world was being called my son. Of course, he replied, annoyed. Grandma explained the decree for the protection of elves and the special laws for elves, not to mention the 12 books of law and the 46 books of history. The dragon exploded with long and unbearable laughter. Every now and again he managed to stop laughing. Then he would look Yosh in the face and start again. Unbearable. Make yourself comfortable, my son, he said finally. I'll explain a few things to you on the way. Definitely, Yosh thought, a kind of big brother. That was 22 of The Last Elf. Next time I read chapter 23. But for now I say, see ya.